morning or afternoon or evening, depending on where you are. We are going to be starting in just a moment. I'll let folks get into the room now for our webinar on career changers. Okay, folks. Well, we're going to go ahead and get started. So again, good morning, afternoon, or evening. Welcome. I am Dr. Joanne Yanez. I'm the Executive Director for the Association of Accredited Naturopathic Medical Colleges. And today we are going to be having a chat. So this is a little bit different from our regular webinars where there is a focused topic and we talk about medical interventions. Today, we're going to talk about your journey. And I'm really excited to share this. A lot of times in January, we're thinking about our lives. We're kind of taking stock. How am I doing? Am I on track to where I want to be? And so today's conversation is with two doctors who took that self-assessment and decided to change gears, change careers in their life. And so we're going to be talking today with Dr. Frawley and Dr. Montgomery about career changers and how they came to be where they're at now. So just a little bit about what we're going to be doing today. So everybody here is in listen only mode. We're happy to have you interact with us. Please use the Q&A so that we can chat, track the questions a bit better. We are recording today, so if you miss a section or if you want to watch it later, feel free. And then for any questions or future issues, please email us at info@aanmc.org. So Dr. Frawley, I'll let you just kind of share a little bit about yourself.
Hi, everyone. I'm very excited to be doing this because I actually started school when I was 28. So I went back. You see, I actually have a chemistry degree for undergrad. So I was a chemist for about 5 years. Absolutely hated it. Absolutely hated it. And then I attended UB like I said, 2016 now. My journey was really my own journey, like of health. I struggled with anxiety and depression for most of my life. As you can see, my extracurriculars incorporated that. And I found this profession through my own journey. So I found this profession as I started to heal myself, started to eat better, and noticed how my anxiety and depression magically went away. And I kind of was looking at graduate schools and came across this and knew that this was what I was supposed to do for the rest of my life. So I think it's never too late, like this conversation is talking about, to change that. And I hope we can help you today to encourage you or give you some advice on how to do that.
Thank you so much. Dr. Montgomery.
Yes, hi. So I'm also excited to be here today. I also entered naturopathic medical school between kind of my 28th and 29th year of life. So prior to that, I was a collegiate soccer coach and had sort of a short career as a player, but then had really dedicated all my time and immersed myself into coaching. And for me, it was a very unique journey. I mean, I had started off pre-med when I was an undergrad and sort of paused that and went a completely different direction and really focused on my coaching career. And over time, some of it was health related. Just as a player and an elite athlete, I was really trying to understand how to best support my body so that I could continue my playing career and be healthy and remain healthy. And then as I moved into my coaching career, I was trying to figure out ways to support the health and well-being of the student athletes that I worked with beyond the field, right? Because we know that what goes on off the field can certainly impact their performance on the field. So I had just sort of looked up different, careers. Like I thought about massage therapy and I was like, no, it's not really it. And I was really motivated and passionate about women's health in general at the time. And I had sort of happened across naturopathic medicine on the internet. And then I sort of saw it and I saw the requirements and I was like, I don't know if medical school's for me again, and I kind of went back to just doing my coaching and then thought about it a little bit more, did a little bit more reading up on it, talking to other naturopathic doctors just to learn more about what it even entailed. And I was like, I think this is what I want to do. And for me, my journey sort of took me, I had to go back to school to take some prerequisite courses. But when I was really enjoying those, meaning going back and learning organic chemistry and enjoying that and anatomy and physiology, I was like, yeah, I think I'm ready to do this. So that's when I made the transition and then shifted and applied to school and then started when I was about 29. So I graduated in 2012. When I was about 34. So it's been quite the journey.
Thank you both for sharing. So today's agenda, we're going to talk a little bit with each of the speakers, and then we'll entertain a little bit of Q&A. So the first question that I have for you both, describe the moment you knew you had to make a change and become a naturopathic doctor. How did you know it was the right choice? So maybe Dr. Montgomery, why don't you start?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I had questions about it for a while. I was sort of thinking coaching wasn't where I wanted to be long-term. And there were various reasons for that. I actually really loved coaching, but there were some elements of collegiate coaching that I didn't love. And so I was trying to figure out, like, I was drawn to medicine and healthcare, and I wanted to be able to make an impact. And as I was looking through and learning about all the different ways one can be in medicine and be in healthcare, when I looked at all the tools that naturopathic doctors have at the end of their training, I was like, that is what I want. Like, I want to be a doctor, but I want to be a doctor who does more than just prescribe drugs and do surgery. I want someone who's got that skill set plus this amazing skill set of like understanding nutrition and herbal medicine and homeopathy in much more deliberate and intentional way. And I think I just mentioned this earlier, the moment that I knew it was right for me is when I was like, okay, well, that sounds great on paper, it sounds great when you talk about it, but let's see how it feels to go back to school again. So I started going back to school to get some of my prerequisite coursework done. And when I was enjoying those courses and doing well in them, I was like, yeah, this is the right decision. And so then that's when I felt more confident in moving forward with that.
Thank you. Dr. Farley.
It's such a loaded question. So I think I mentioned, so I was not in a great place, and I actually had lost my last chemistry job. I was working retail just to have a job, and I was looking at grad schools. And what I actually was searching for was using my chemistry degree with herbs, like trying to find either a vitamin company or something that I could utilize my chemistry skills with. And I came across Bridgeport's program. Luckily, I'm in Connecticut, so it was just easy. And I saw it. And like I said, everything clicked for me. And I went to an open house and talked to everybody, and it just made so much sense. And I did something similar where I was like, well, I had all my prerequisites. I was just at the cusp of needing to take them all again. So I actually decided to take one class. I actually went to a local community college and I took microbiology. And I said, can I still do this? And it reminded me of how much I loved science. And that kind of really got the ball rolling. And then I applied, and it just kind of made sense, and it happened.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I had a little problem here with the screen sharing really quick. Give me 1 second.
Joanne, while you're working on that, can I answer?
Yes.
I just saw a question come through from
Yeah.
one of the attendees. Just since you're working on that anyway, is 28 does seem young for a lot of people. And I would say in my cohort, in my incoming class, I went to National University of Natural Medicine, and some of my, best friends that I actually gained from medical school, they had all started naturopathic medical school at age like 50, 51. Mm-hmm. So this was already like their second and third career. So I know some people have questions about like how late is too late. And, I'd say it's so dependent on the individual. So
completely agree. I had classmates in their 50s as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thank you both for sharing that. I think that one of the very common questions we get from people is it too late? How do I start over again? I've raised a family, or I've had careers. What do I do? And like you both said, my classmates as well, same thing. I had classmates from early 20s to 60s and everything in between. And I think it really brings a diversity and a richness to the education. Mm-hmm. So the next question we have is if you can talk about relocating or transitioning from prior worker to student. And I know we've had folks who've been out of school for 20, 30 years, and like it gets scary and daunting. So can you talk about those challenges and the transition?
Yeah, I'm happy to speak to that maybe first. I think the biggest challenge for me, so I had to relocate. I was living in Milwaukee, Wisconsin at the time when I had applied to school, and that's where I was coaching. And then I had to I had to relocate to Portland, Oregon. I was excited to move to Portland, Oregon. I mean, at the time I did not, I was not married. I had no children. So that was one thing that certainly made that transition a little bit easier. I mean, I will say, even though that piece was, there were maybe a few strings attached with that, the transition in other ways was very challenging for me. And I think the biggest challenge was that I had been more or less coaching full time since I graduated from college. And that is a very different life than being a student full time. So I went from being, on my feet in training sessions, constantly moving my body from like 5 a.m. to 9 p.m. every day, in traveling a lot and recruiting, and to being asked to be kind of sit at a table or at a desk and listen to a lot of lectures, at least in the first couple of years. And then once we got to clinic, it was much better. But, when you talk about those first couple of years, when there's a little bit more classroom work, I struggled with that. I mean, that was really hard for me. And I think, there were things that I ended up doing that helped with that, kind of getting a regular gym membership and keeping and joining like the soccer team at school, things that kind of kept me active. But that was very challenging, on top of just, the logistics of like moving all of your stuff to a new place and creating a new community. Change has always been tough for me. So that was definitely challenging. I don't know what kinds of things I could have done to make that transition or that process go much more smoothly. I think there's always an inherent, change is always mixed, right? And so I think I sort of anticipated there was going to be some stress with just a change in environment, change in community, so on and so forth. And so I basically tried to stay connected to the people that I knew were really grounding and helped kind of anchor me to the process that I was going through and the decisions I'd made, and kind of kept me calm in those moments of stress. And then I sort of turned to the things that I knew were helpful for my body, which is like, working out, meaning like going for a run, going for walks in nature, joining a soccer team. And even I picked up a really light coaching job just so I could, because coaching is always what sort of, helped calm me and like kept me, de-stressed me. So I coached a youth soccer team, and those were very helpful tools for me. And I also did acupuncture. So that was like, those are my big things.
Thank you.
I think for me, I was lucky, seeing that my school was in my state, and I live in a very tiny state. And also I was very lucky that our school had a graduate dorm, and that made transition so much easier. because you just moved into a dorm like you did in undergrad. And I did that my first year, and I'm glad I did that. And then I made friends and was able to then rent space off campus. So if that's a possibility, I highly recommend it. It's weird to live in a dorm again as a 29-year-old, but it was very helpful in that transition. I also figured out probably into the second year, I literally would schedule everything down to doing laundry. So I knew that I had these 2 hours on Thursday to do laundry. That's when I was going to do laundry. I even scheduled in time for family and friends, because I'm with Dr. Montgomery. You gotta, like, if you have a base, stick with your base, even if it's just like a text every week, a phone call every week, just to be like, hey, because eventually you will leave these 4 years and you're going to go back to that base. So maintaining with that base, I think, is very, very important, and using burnout techniques. So Dr. Montgomery had her exercise. I had my movies. I had going to the theater. We would do it after every final exam week, we would go see a movie together. Something that would just keep life light, because it is pretty intense program.
Very good points. Thank you. So the next question, what are some tips? And we did have a financial aid question come in. And before we jump into the answers here, I do want to share that the admissions counselors at all of the colleges can connect you with the financial aid officers, who would be able to provide specific guidance for you, what loans, what scholarships, et cetera, you may be eligible for. So I highly recommend making a contact with those folks to get a specific plan for you and create, I always think of like the three-legged stool. You have the financial plan, you have your academic plan, which may be your prerequisites or whatever courses you need to get ready. And then you have your personal plan, like what do you need to get in order in life in order to make this happen. And so for me, it's kind of like this three-legged stool of planning. But now let's talk money, let's talk finances. So what does a financial plan look like for medical school?
Dr. Frawley, you want to go first?
I don't know about that. It's about playing the game. It's about playing smart. I think we talked about when we kind of did a dress rehearsal for this, remembering that this is career. This is a career, right? So someone actually was talking about it in the questions I just saw too. Keeping in mind that you're gonna want money after you graduate is really, really important. So even if you're taking some of that student loans and putting it into savings for after graduation, for getting your licensure, for starting your own business, I think that's really important. So that, I think, is the smartest thing I did when I was at school. Trying to think, is there anything else? Dr. Montgomery had a couple really good ideas when we chatted.
I mean, yeah, now I'm second guessing those, but I think, if anything, I am happy to share my experience in terms of what I learned from it. I was a bit naive going into it, even though I had a career and I had worked for some years in that. Collegiate soccer coaching is not exactly like you're not making a lot of money in that department. And so it's not like I had lots saved up. So I sort of went full force into the student loan thing and acquired. Yeah, I was gonna say, that was my financial plan at the time. Is I didn't really think about it as much as I should have. And, looking back on it, Joanne's talking about like meeting with the financial aid counselors and so on and so forth. I really wish I would have paused and done that. And again, I think a lot of that was sort of my naivete going in and being like, and a little bit of privilege playing into that too. I'm like, oh, I'll figure it out. It'll be fine. And like, at the end of the day, I think I probably made things a little bit more difficult for myself because I didn't budget before I entered school. And I like Dr. Frawley's idea where she was really thinking ahead, so for me, I would encourage people to take advantage of those resources and meeting with a financial aid planner. I think I sort of relied too heavily on student loans. And then when I graduated, I moved back to Minnesota to open a practice here. And, even though it's been very successful and it happened all very quickly, the first year or so, it's going to be tough. It's not like you open a practice and you're all of a sudden full. And so, I was helped by the fact that like I lived with my family again, which is mixed, right? Like that's great that I had family to live with, but by the end of that first year, I think everybody was pretty ready to be done. So I think like, pros and cons, I think if you have resources already available, I think it's good to meet with someone who understands the financial commitment of medical school. And so the financial aid planners are a really good resource here. And to understand like how to really manage the money you might already have. And if you don't already have a savings, understand what's the smart idea for you in terms of what resources should you utilize? Are there things outside of student loans that are available to you? And how do you budget for the whole package for all those years of schooling and then afterwards?
One other point that I'm going to jump in on here, we had interviewed a doc out of Oregon who has a very successful career and has really set up a financial model for herself. And one of the pieces of advice she gave was to actually meet with a financial planner as well. So not just, you're going to be a business owner, like, would you just go into business without any research? Would you, apply for business loans without having a business plan? So one of the things that her recommendation was to meet with a financial planner, go through your own personal finances, your own, that takes into consideration your age, your responsibilities, your specific plan, when you want to retire, like all of those things, and have a plan for that. And so that is one of the additional areas that I would make a recommendation for in regard to a financial plan for medical school. One of the questions that came in was about working during school. And I know Dr. Montgomery, you mentioned a very light coaching job. One thing that I will say is that is very variable. Whether you can work during this program. And so I typically guide students not to plan on having to work. If you can swing it, fabulous, great for you. But I would not set yourself up to plan on having to work through the program. It is a very rigorous program, especially if you do it in the 4-year plan. And there often isn't a lot of time. I personally worked for the first 9 months, and I know I burnt myself out. I was exhausted and sick at the end of 9 months, and I had to quit my job because it was just too much. And then once you're in clinical training, your hours are strange. You're working on your patient cases after hours. Like there's a lot of time that it takes to dedicate to this program to do well. And also you should be focused on networking and setting yourself up for future time, for your future career. I did have classmates that worked. I had one classmate who was a flight attendant, and she brought her books on the plane, and she would sit in the jump seat and study for anatomy or what have you. I had other folks who were accountants or bookkeepers or massage therapists or nurses, and they were able to kind of, do small project type work or work when they were able to. But it also depends on your study skills. It depends on how strong of a student you are, how quickly you retain information, how much study time you need. Like there's so many pieces to it. So when people do ask about working, it is very person dependent. So there is no one right answer there. I don't know if either of you would jump in and say anything else about that before we move on.
That's how my classmates were too. Like Deb worked at Starbucks when she could. We had a flight attendant. We had some massage therapists. Like that was pretty much the only, like I wouldn't have been, with my skill set, I wouldn't have been able to work, right? Because how was I going to have be a chemist and do this? And also with how my study needs, there was no way. I had to focus directly on school.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I had a couple of classmates who one worked sort of like did a call center at mostly at night. And so it didn't never really conflicted with classes. But again, for her, that seemed to work for her. She could do that and still get her studying done and everything like that. And that's the type of student she was. For me, I think the coaching was very limited in that, like, there were a couple of nights a week that I coached training sessions, and then occasionally on the weekends I would have to travel for games. And that was fine for the first couple of years. But then as we got into more clinical rotations, I ended up having to step away from that just because I couldn't maneuver this, like scheduling your clinical rotations. It just was too much to try to do both, even though it wasn't that many hours. But it's sort of like I made it happen mostly because I knew it brought me joy. But I also did work study on campus. And I feel like that was a nice happy medium because, you get some funds through work study and you're kind of doing at most 4 hours a week. And what I liked about it is that you could work, at least at our school, in different settings. So like I did some work in the library, but then I ended up doing quite a few hours both in the medicinary. So I really learned a lot about like how to manage everything from supplements to bulk herbs to tinctures, and how to just logistically manage all that and dispense that. But then also I worked at a lot of our community clinics, and it really taught me and informed how I practice today, and then also my managerial skills and like how to set something up, especially in a community clinic setting. So those were kind of nice work study options that were not too much in terms of hours per week, but they gave me a little bit of extra experience on the side.
Thank you. And I think your point about gaining experience is also important to, working outside of your future career is fine as well. But I think of this as an investment in your career. And so the more that you can do to network, to set yourself up for success, and your next steps is really, the best piece of advice I could give. So let's move on to another question here. What are some advice? What are some tips for advice for parents potentially applying to medical school or attending?
I mean, I can speak to this a little bit. I was not a parent going into medical school, but during school, I became a parent. And so I think as a parent, if there's one thing I've learned is that you become very, you learn how to manage your time because there are limited hours in a day and you really have to set your priorities. And so I think if you're a parent right now and you're thinking about applying, you really have to sit down. Like if you're a single parent, that's one situation. If you're a parent with another partner, I mean, I think you have to look at who is going to be your support system, and there's a lot of factors here that are at play, like how old are, how many kids, how old are the children, so on and so forth, because that can all really affect like how much time you have available, what are the expectations, what are your priorities. But I think, the good news is once we were in school, I found there was actually quite a bit of support for parents. I mean, I think it could always be improved upon, but there was lots of support both from the faculty and the staff as well as other students for those that were parents. Whether it was making accommodations so that they could manage children's needs as well as like being able to take tests, making sometimes it just kind of depended on the circumstance. It was very individualized. I think it's tough. I'm not going to say it's easy, and I think any parent is going to know that it's not going to be an easy process. But I think if you're organized and you have your time organized and you have your support system, and it's really clear that you are going to be focused on this career and on the schooling, that is going to be occupying the bulk of your time. I think if that's clear to everybody involved, then, and you've got a supportive, partner, spouse, and other support network, family, then I think it's doable. But I think you've got to be really clear about that before you apply, because what you don't want to have happen is you apply and go, and then all of a sudden you're in your first year of school and you're like, wow, this is a lot. And then you've got, whether it's your family or spouse or whatever, being like, well, we didn't realize it was going to be this bad, and that could really cause a lot of disruptions. So.
Thank you. I know I was not a parent during school, but I have talked to many folks who have had to juggle the responsibilities. And I will say that the people who are parents who go through the program are probably some of the most organized folks that I've ever seen. Every moment, every day is scheduled and planned, and support networks are really important. Backup plans for the support networks when things fall through, kids get sick, what do you do? Like, you have to have all of those contingency plans in place. But I had one classmate of mine I always thought was a superwoman. She had 3 children during the course of the naturopathic program. And it was really incredible, but she was so highly organized and just had a system down, and it was incredible to watch her go through the program. Very, very focused, where the rest of us could kind of, taper off our focus for a little bit, not be quite as laser. She was on it. So there are ways of doing it. It is very possible. And I just want to give that level of support, that is something that, a lot of times I'll hear people question, well, I have a house, or I've got my kids, and how do I do this? How do I organize this? And it is possible. It just takes a little bit more of that, the 3-legged stool. The personal plan needs to be a bit more built out. Okay. So the next question, what are some advantages of going to medical school as a career changer or later in life?
Fulfillment, happiness. No, later in life, I think it was helpful having, and Dr. Montgomery, I think, probably is in the same boat. We were a little older, so we had a little more life experience. So when we made this career change, we knew it was for the better. And I think that was massive for us, or at least for me, because I think at 22, if I had tried to do this, I think I would have been a different ballgame.
Yeah. I agree with that. I feel like if I would have tried to do this when I was younger, and this is just me personally, is like, I don't think I was in the space to do it. I wasn't in the headspace. And I feel fine about that. But I think because I made a very intentional decision to go into medical school, and when I did, it was like, you're just clear about what you're doing there. You're not distracted as easily by things that can happen in life, both in life, but also within school, because it's a comprehensive program. There's a lot to cover in a relatively short amount of time, even though 4 to 5 years sounds like a long time. It's a blip, in retrospect. And I think the advantages to going to medical school later on in life is you do bring that, a little bit more maturity, a little bit more groundedness, a little bit better sense, usually, not always, but usually a little bit better sense of yourself. Like, okay, who am I? What am I doing here? And then I think from there, it also I felt like it was easier for me to transition after graduation into a role with another practice, but I also felt like I was able to also explore other options outside of private practice. And I felt like because I had that level of maturity coming out of school, I had that earlier experience working in a university setting, I sort of felt really comfortable being like, let's explore other options too, and make something happen. So, yeah.
Yeah, I teach at a local community college as well. And I think, again, if I had graduated at that would be 26, I would not have gone for that professor job. We're at 32. I was like, yeah, why not? So I think there's some great advantages because where you are, you've done so much in your life that making that career change, you actually, like I said, I utilized a lot of my chemistry skills, but I also utilize the knowledge I gained from my mid-20s that I don't think a lot of my classmates would have necessarily been able to do as they got out.
Good points. So there was a question that came in. I am going to take this kind of just veer a little bit for a moment. What things did you do, or what recommendations would you have for folks about setting up a business plan during school. I know that each of the schools has business courses. There are career advisors at every one of the schools that I always recommend students connect with early on, resume resources, all of those types of things. But maybe if you could each talk a little bit to just kind of setting up your after graduation life.
So we had classes. We definitely, and luckily Dr. Lewis brought in a financial advisor for us for an extra curricular, like outside of school, if we wanted to participate. That was extremely extensive. It was a couple weekends of really understanding finances, business plans. You just have to take advantage of those opportunities when you're there and kind of at least start the process, because it's definitely different when you get out. But at least if you know how to write those things up, it's a lot easier once you hit the ground running to leave and be like, okay, actually I want this, and just make those minor adjustments.
I'll say for me, my experience was a little bit different in that we had business classes at National University of Natural Medicine, and I had sort of learned a lot from all the different doctors I had preceptored with. And unlike a lot of my colleagues who were very smart, by the way, who made a business plan before they left school, they had like even started their websites and so on and so forth. I actually opted to join an existing practice. So there was a doctor who, was 5-6 years into practice already in Minnesota, and she was looking to bring on a newer doc. And I opted to join her practice because for me, I was really looking for that residency-like position, and there were limited residency options. And so rather than take up part-time residency in Portland, I opted to move back to Minnesota and join an existing practice where, the agreement between us was that she would really manage the business side of the practice, and I would just focus on continuing my clinical, getting my clinical experience and just focus on the clinical work. And that actually worked out really nicely for me because I did get that comfort and confidence with my clinical decision making over those years. And then over those years, I also learned a lot from her in terms of how to run a business, like how it works in practice. And so I really took that with me and then transitioned away from that clinic about 5 years later into a different clinic setting because I had learned a lot about what do I really need? How do I really do this? And then, eventually I actually moved out completely on my own into my own clinic setting just a few years ago, partially because that's when I felt like really good about doing it. I had learned from a couple of different sort of business mentors about different ways that clinics can work. And, and then now I'm getting to create that, what I really want. I've sort of taken what I've learned and morphed it. And I also, was a little bit different in that, back in 2018, I actually joined as a casual employee. I joined the University of Minnesota physicians with psychiatry specifically. So again, I sort of opted to, kind of spread myself out a little bit. Like I've always maintained my private practice, but then I really saw an opportunity to sort of put naturopathic medicine on the map and get it into a more mainstream clinical setting. And I saw that as a really good opportunity. And so I went ahead and sort of scaled back on my clinical hours in my private practice so that I could put a little bit more time into this other part-time position there. So mine's a little bit different than what a lot of people do. I know a lot of people kind of go straight into private practice. Some go into residency. Everybody's a little bit different, but I think the good news is that nowadays there are an increasing number of opportunities for NDs. So if you want to do private practice, you can. There are an increasing number of more experienced docs like myself and older who are looking for younger docs to join their practice. There are some universities or some people are going into research. I think there's different types of opportunities depending on what you feel like your strong skill set is and who you are as a person.
There's so much career flexibility that I see from my vantage point with folks who are writing, who are doing public speaking, who are in academia, who are working for the natural products or supplement industry. Like you had mentioned, Dr. Frawley, looking for jobs in the natural products industry. So there's a lot of flexibility out there. Most folks, according to a survey that AANMC did, do go into clinical practice, but there are a lot of people who don't. So, and I think we need to destigmatize that it's okay to do clinic part-time or not do clinical practice at all if that's not what you're called to. So I want to ask you, there are two questions that came in that are somewhat similar. If you could speak to what life is like as a student, what does that look like, course-wise, once you start clinical rotations, what's the difference between that didactic and that clinical time? If you could talk a little bit about that, that would be great. Thank you.
So when I went to school, we had the most classes. So do you want to take this, Dr. Montgomery, so I don't scare everybody?
I mean, I don't know if I'm going to say much different. Why don't you go ahead and speak to what your experience was, and then I can speak to mine, but they might be kind of similar.
So I saw the time. There were people were asking what our schedule. It's Monday through Friday, at least Monday through Friday. Some Saturdays. And I usually got to school I like to be at school early so I could do a little work. So I usually got to school around 7:30, 8, and I was usually leaving about 6 o'clock. It's pretty intense. So we were having about 14 classes a semester. That's usually about what we would do. We were averaging about 22, 24 credits a semester.
Yeah, I'd echo that. I think I was like Dr. Frawley. I like to get to school a little bit early. I would kind of go to the gym, workout, and then I would arrive at school and give myself a little bit of time to eat some breakfast and get some, last minute studying done, or maybe go to the library, or sometimes work a couple hours at my work study job. But the point is that I was generally at school about 7:30 in the morning. And then oftentimes first class was at 8. And then the end of the day, depending on the day, if it was an early day, we'd be done by 4, but usually it was more like 6. Occasionally it was as late as 9, because every once in a while there was a course that a class that would go later, but that's not the norm. Yeah. But then you would have, Saturdays, there were some Saturdays. I also did a dual program. So I took on a master's in Chinese medicine. And so that my situation was a little bit distinct in that, I basically took on an extra course load. So my course load was typically close to 30 credits a term, which is a lot. So typically I was just gone all day, and then I'd come home and kind of eat dinner. The type of student I didn't really study that much afterwards, because I felt like my brain was fried and I just needed to relax. But then, I'd sort of wake up early and get started again. So once you get into clinicals, that's really the first couple of years, because they're really primarily didactic, where you're in the classroom, maybe minimal. You might get into the clinic for a few rotations here and there. And then as you get into your clinical rotations, you might have some fewer classes that you're taking, but that other time at our school, we usually had 4-hour sort of shifts or rotations that we would do at different clinical sites. And so, depending on what your clinical rotations looked like, you might have, 2 back-to-back clinic rotations. So you'd be working from 4 to 8. You'd be working from 12 to 4 and then 4 to 8, or sometimes you would just have one and you'd be working from 4 to 8 at night. And then you'd have classes in the morning. So once the clinical rotations start, it's a little bit more variable in terms of your schedule, but you still kind of plan on you're ultimately you don't have a lot of wiggle room during the day to schedule other stuff, is I guess the best way to put it.
And I saw that same comment. They asked about going home on the weekend. Yeah, you should go home on the weekends. You should go see your family if you can on the weekends when you can. It's not going to be every weekend, but again, I was lucky. My parents, we were in the same state, so I could. So, and then I think there was another question, would it be smart to relocate to the area before school? Yeah, that would be awesome if you could do that. That would be amazing.
Smart idea.
Yeah.
Agree. I got to school, I think I moved to Portland about a month before school started. And in retrospect, I think that was fine. But maybe I would have opted to do that a little bit sooner, so that I could have felt a little bit more rooted and sort of had my sense of that community for a little bit longer period of time. But that's also because me personally, it just takes me a long time to adapt to new environments. So.
Well, and the other thing to take into consideration too is if you are a career changer and all of the schools have naturopathic medical clinics where students can attend. We hosted a webinar a while ago, and some of the student members definitely shared, take advantage of those, your student discount, take advantage of the healthcare available to you. But if you're an older person, you might need additional medical care. And so, not providing enough time to get established with doctors and dentists and eye doctors and all of that, like that takes time whenever you move to a new area. And so, if you have a family, if you've got kids that you also have to manage, getting pediatricians or getting them into schools, and there are different levels of getting settled into a place. Getting veterinary docs on board if you have pets, and just all of those little pieces that you're not going to want to have to do once you start school. Like, you really are going to want to focus on school.
Yeah.
And so all of those like extra things of life, if you can get those handled beforehand, that is definitely a strong recommendation of mine. Like, don't have to first start trying to find doctors and establish care once you're in school. Like, if you do have health conditions, if you do have things that require, regular maintenance, get that squared away before. So we have a couple of different questions coming in, but I would love to talk a little bit about, so there was a question about work study. If you can just share a little bit more about that.
I mean, I'm happy to. Work study was sort of part of the financial aid package I received. And the way it worked is that ultimately there were different work study positions available through the school. And what I liked about work study is because, you could, you just basically apply for a position. And then when they take on someone who's doing work study, it's very clear, like, what the expectations are. It's like, there's only so many hours per week that you're going to work, so on and so forth. But what I appreciated about work study is that limited hours per week, up to 4 hours a week, I think it was at the time when I went to school. And then there were positions in every facet of the university. And so I sort of got a chance to choose what I wanted to learn more about. So as I said before, like, I worked shifts. I worked in the medicinary, which is like manages all the patient prescriptions for herbs and supplements and homeopathic remedies and tinctures. So I got to learn sort of like everything about managing a medicinary. I also, a lot of like the little skills in measuring out tinctures and how to do bulk herb formulations and so on and so forth. And then I also worked in the library. So just kind of managing and understanding, a little bit more about like the types of texts and like resources we had available. And then the biggest, I think, amount of experience I got was working community clinics. Like, I would work the front desk for the community clinics. And these were sort of like clinics that we had around the Portland metro area in different communities that were underserved populations. And basically, you're kind of responsible for running the clinic, more or less, but it's a very, low overhead, very low maintenance type of clinic setup, but you're basically helping check patients in, check them out, manage needs of the clinicians on staff during that day. And so I felt like that was an invaluable experience. But certainly there were other opportunities working in the lab, working in research, working in, admissions. I mean, I think there's pretty much positions in nearly every facet of the university.
Thank you. Would you both be able to talk a little bit about getting licensed? What are boards like? What are, what was the licensing process like?
What are boards like? So there are two sets of boards. So after your second year, you do your generals, and then there's another set after your 4 years. So the second set is the intense set. It was 3 days, the exam, depending on, because you did your acupuncture too, Dr. Montgomery.
Correct.
So you did I did my minor surgery. So it's 3 mornings or 3 afternoons. Four.
I did all the add-ons. Yes.
Oh, you did all the add-ons. So I did minor surgery. You can do add-on minor surgery, acupuncture, farm, IV. Yeah. So we don't have that in Connecticut, so I didn't add that on. So technically, yeah, it's 3 to 4 days. It's pretty intense. The questions are weird, but what's nice is there are some amazing programs out there, like Dr. Anderson's program, right? That can prepare you for the exams.
Mhm.
So I know about you guys, but I got hand-me-down study material, and then I pass them down. So you get prepared.
Mhm.
And there's plenty of things to help you prepare.
Mhm. Yeah, I agree. There's plenty of exam prep for board exams, for both sets of board exams. I did also take acupuncture board exams, but compared to the ND board exams, those were fine. I was like, this is fine. The ND board exams, they're a lot to prepare for. And I think I would not underestimate them.
Yeah.
I think, so there's a lot of studying that goes, at the time I had a newborn. So basically who didn't sleep ever. And so I was not really sleeping more than a couple of hours a night for that part of the year when I had to take board exams. But basically what a very colicky baby did provide me an opportunity with was me and my husband would basically walk her around the park just like for hours on end, and he would quiz me and we would study. So I guess that was the bonus. As far as licensing, that is totally dependent on the state where you would like to practice. So I had tried to do all of the things to be licensed in Oregon, because at the time when I started the process, I thought I might still remain there to practice. But once I found out I was going to move to Minnesota, I actually discontinued that process and just said, Minnesota has a registration process. Right now they register NDs, which is pretty similar to licensing, but it's just sort of semantics. And that in Minnesota, it's a pretty smooth and easy process. You pay the medical board some money, you undergo a background check, you submit fingerprints. So that is all a process that takes time. You have to allow at least a few months for that to happen, even though they accept applications on a rolling basis now. But, if you are organized and you have all your transcripts and everything ready to go, that's about as smooth as you can get. Now with other states, it might be a little bit more extensive. Arizona's got a little bit more extensive licensing, and Oregon definitely does as well. And it also sort of depends on what your goals are. Like, do you want to do IV therapy? Do you want to do minor surgery? Do you want to apply for a DEA number? Those are all things that would make the application process a little bit more complicated in other states. But we just don't have that scope of practice in Minnesota, so those weren't an option for me.
Same in Connecticut. It's pretty much, licensure was probably the easy part. Like, I took a test that was about the law, and then good. I think it's important people knows that too, that you graduate in May. I graduated in spring. I graduated in May. I couldn't take my boards until August, and then I didn't find out until the beginning of October.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think that's important for people. So there's a span of time, and pretty much all summer I was studying. Luckily, I have a really good mentor. And what I did is I went and volunteered at his office part-time, so that I was working the front desk. I was making phone calls. I was keeping up my clinical experience. And then the rest of the time I was studying. I didn't work when I studied. I know some people did, but that was kind of how I balanced it. And I think it's important to know that you have this giant window of kind of, hopefully you pass. And that's a great space that was a good way to do it. Connect with someone in your area that you want to be in, that has a practice, and say, hey, can I just come in and help you a couple hours a week just to, keep your clinical practice in mind, but also learn from experience.
Yeah, that's great advice.
Yeah, I think folks don't always think about that time after graduation and then before you plan. One thing that I will also tack on to the board discussion is that I have seen some students just say, oh, I'm just going to take them just as a test run. I do not recommend that. One, it is costly.
Yes.
it is expensive. So it is expensive to take boards. And if you don't like the idea of throwing money away, then you shouldn't do that. The other thing is that it does go on your record. And so, you take the boards and do them diligently and study for them and give them the props that they deserve, because they are definitely very rigorous. And I know I typed that in the chat as well. So we are coming up on time. Maybe let's leave folks with some of the biggest advice that you'd like to, if you could tell your younger self a piece of advice about, how to manage this, what advice would you give yourself?
So I was lucky enough, I was not good enough to go back to my school and do some ground rounds on how to get insurance panels. And the advice I gave them is study to be a good doctor, not to pass your exams. I figured that out probably year 3, and it changed how I approached things, and made it a lot less stressful. So it was more, I want to learn this stuff so I can be a better doctor, not because I need to pass next week's exam. And it just changed my perspective completely of how I was going to approach school. I'm a solid B- student, but I also got the overall achievement award in my school, in my class, because the teachers recognized what I was doing and how I was approaching the program. So that any career, any school, any graduate school, study because you want to be good at that job, not to pass the grade.
That's great advice. I think for me, if I was going to talk to my younger self again, I'd say just continue to talk to as many different people as you can that have, gone through this career change. So like if this is the career change you're thinking of, I think I got to know a naturopathic doctor in my area. There weren't that many, and I felt very comfortable with her. I really liked her. I visited the schools, and that was sort of the extent of it. I didn't really go observe many. There weren't that many practicing NDs at the time in the Midwest, so I didn't really observe anybody at first. I didn't really talk to anyone about the financials. And so in retrospect, I wish I would have reached out to more like existing students and people who had already graduated for the program to talk to them about all of the things we're talking about today, to get a little bit better sense and go in a little bit more prepared. But so that would be my recommendation is, I think there's a lot of people out there practicing in different capacities. Talk to them, find out what their experience was like, ask all the same questions that we answered here today, because there's such a wide variety of people out there who have done what we've done, and they are likely going to have nuanced answers to those questions. They might be a little different than what we said. And part of it's just because everybody's coming from a different place. Everybody has different experience with schooling and their goals for what happens afterwards. So I think the more you gather from other people in terms of things to expect and questions to ask, the more you learn and the more prepared you feel.
And do that in school. I think I didn't do that enough while I was in school. I was so focused again in the first 2 years of passing that I didn't reach out like a lot of my classmates is and network and make connections. I did it too late. I feel like I did it a little too late, and I'm kind of catching up, because it's a great opportunity to meet some amazing people. And I'm with Dr. Montgomery now. If just call a local naturopath. Based on what we do, we're kind of like cool with just talking to you about this stuff. So just call a local naturopath and be like, hey, can we sit down and chat? Can I buy you coffee? Can I buy you a tea? I bet you money that they would take you up on that.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent advice. I think just tacking on to what you said, the biggest piece of advice I typically give folks is start to plan now. Start to mentor, start to, Dr. Montgomery, like you mentioned, talking to different doctors who have different types of practice settings. There are so many different ways. I know there was a question earlier about, what are the careers like? Is this viable? And it absolutely is, but there are so many different ways to do it that sometimes folks get caught up in one way or not really understanding all of the different ways. There are folks who have pure telemedicine practices where they see 100% of all of their patients via telemedicine. There are others who are hands-on. There are others who have very large online dispensaries. There are others who set up concierge medicine. There are still others who have totally non-clinical pathways. And so there are just so many different ways of doing this that really you need to, what I would say as my last piece of advice here is know who you are. What are your strengths? Don't be worried about your classmates and how they study and what grades they get and all of that kind of stuff. Focus on you. What do you need to get through the program? How do you study best? How do you learn best? What are your personal strengths and weaknesses, so that you can design a future for yourself that optimizes your strengths and hopefully doesn't capitalize too much on your weaknesses to put you in a position that you're not enjoying life. Everybody's got parts of of their job that they love and parts that they don't love as much. And so set up your career to optimize those things that you do love so that work isn't going to feel like work. It's not going to feel like a job. It's going to feel like fun. And you're going to be excited to wake up every day and go and do the things you love to do. So that would be what I would say is just, take personality tests, take aptitude tests, like take your study skills tests, like learn now. Like I said earlier, you don't have time in school to start figuring out that much. So, learn all those things about yourself, know how you study, know how you retain, know if you need to be by yourself with earplugs in, or if you need a big group of people around you, like all that needs to get worked out before you start school. So with that, I love that you all came today. We had a fabulous audience, and I'm so excited that you all are seriously considering this career. I hope one day we can count you all as colleagues. And until that time, we have these monthly events for folks. I'm going to put up contact information here for Dr. Frawley.
Yes, follow us on Instagram and Facebook, please. Yes, please. That's part of our business. Remember, we're small businesses too. The more you follow us, the other people can get in hold of us and figure out what we do and help us out too. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so here's their contact and their social media handles, and here's for Dr. Montgomery as well. And then AANMC, we host these free monthly events. Next month, we're talking about heart health, and we will have an admissions panel, hot off the presses. Admissions panel was just launched for March. And so if you have specific questions about admissions, financial aid, all of that kind of stuff, that is the place to come. So that's going to be March 5th. So Finding Your Fit, March 5th, and Heart Health next February. So hope that you can make our future events. Thank you all for coming today, and I hope to see you all at a future event. And thank you so much to our speakers. I so appreciate both of you sharing your journeys with everyone here today at AANMC. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.